Did you think that drawing portraits and building a body of work that you just loved would be this really fun but also tranquil experience? I did, and for 20 years I only drew with the grid method, and then I transitioned to developing my own style and only drawing by freehand, and it is a completely different experience, and I wished I would have just approached it in a much more smarter way to help speed things along. So to help you make your portrait journey 10 times easier, here are 10 lessons that I wish I would have learned sooner. Lesson 1. I would spend sometimes months on a portrait trying to make it look as realistic as possible, only to finish and feel absolutely nothing about it because it looked like every other hyper-realism piece out there. Now I try to ignore it and tell myself, if I just make this next piece even more realistic, I would feel different about it. I never did. So lesson 1, changing your approach changes your mindset, which changes your body of work. It wasn't until I changed the way that I approached my drawings that I developed my own unique style and felt proud of the work I was creating. Lesson 2, because I was completely dependent on using the grid method, my workflow was this really long and laborious task that would not only just suck the life out of me, but it would suck the life and soul out of my drawing as well. It wasn't until I made that shift that I learned freehand that my process of workflow not only became this fun and enjoyable experience, but it also drastically reduced the amount of time it would take me to complete a portrait. Lesson 2. Once you learn freehand drawing, you are so much more effective and efficient. What would take me weeks and sometimes months to finish a portrait now only takes me a few hours, depending on the piece, maybe a couple of days. Lesson 3. The beginning stages, the foundation of any portrait, is the most important part, and it's also one of the more difficult things to understand. And drawing with pencils made that process a lot more difficult because the actual fibers in the pencil would be embedded into the paper a lot more, which meant any kind of correction that I needed to make added another level of difficulty. Once I changed to charcoal powder, my foundations actually got better because charcoal powder is such a forgiving medium. So those corrections are a lot easier to make, which meant my portraits then got better. Lesson 3. Charcoal powder is a very forgiving medium. Now I'm not saying that pencils are bad. I'm just saying that charcoal powder just gives you more room to breathe. Lesson 4. Because I only knew how to draw with the grid method, I was confined to this process that I absolutely hated by the end of it, which made me lose all passion for my own artwork, and I even stopped drawing for a while because of it. I couldn't connect to what I was doing anymore. It wasn't until I accepted that I needed to learn something that I wasn't good at and something that I didn't know how to do, that I realized there's a whole landscape, a whole world of untouched ground that I've not explored for over half of my life with my art. So lesson 4, there's actually 2 lessons here. Every new thing you learn reveals possibilities you never knew existed, and mastering proportions expands and completely opens up your creative journey. Lesson 5. When learning freehand, I would find myself just chasing my tail, making these endless corrections about 50 times until I finally got some kind of resemblance of my subject, because I didn't know at the time there's actually different approaches in that one method. And I don't mean mixing methods like mixing the Loomis method with a more structural approach. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, within a structural method, there's different approaches in that. And I was trying to combine all of them without actually even being aware of what they are, which meant I was just making it so much more difficult for myself. It wasn't until I realized what these different approaches are and when to use them that my work transitioned. So lesson 5, there's no single right way of drawing. There's just more difficult ways and more easier ways. I mean, obviously there are very wrong ways of drawing, but once you understand each approach in that method, you can weave in and out of them because they each have their own benefits, which means the entire process becomes more like a dance rather than a fight. Lesson 6. I would get to a point of a drawing where I would pause because I was just unsure about where I wanted to take it. I would be confident in actually capturing my subject's likeness, but I would be at a standstill and almost run the risk of ruining the drawing because I didn't know how or where to take the drawing to portray this certain mood or feeling that I wanted. Once I actually started proper planning and having proper prep work, my entire process became very streamlined. I knew exactly where I was starting, I knew the kind of style that I wanted, I knew the kind of mood that I wanted to portray, and I knew exactly how to get there as well. Lesson 6, style isn't found, it's built. Now naturally, if you draw every single day for 10 years, you will build this natural style. But with actual planning and actual prep work, you can build your style 10 times faster. Lesson 7, again, I would get to a point of the portrait where I would come to a standstill because I didn't know what to do with the background. And it wasn't until I realized that the background is just as important as the portrait itself, and you want to look at it as one identity, that's when my work just naturally fell into place. Lesson 7, you want unity between your portrait and the background because it transforms your whole piece. You don't want to build the portrait up by itself and then add the background around it because it causes this disconnect. You want to build the portrait up and the background at the same time so it works in unison. Lesson 8, endlessly refining details and chasing perfection not only led me nowhere, but it also killed my creative spark. Detail paralysis is a thing, and it's not a good thing. It's tunnel vision at its finest, distorting where you actually are in the process of the drawing. Now this is why I actually prefer my brush-based method, because it puts guardrails up against that so you can't work in the same way as a pencil. Again, it gives you more breathing room. Lesson 8, it's actually easier to fall into detail paralysis with pencils. And again, I'm not saying pencils are bad, I'm just saying charcoal powder is more user friendly. Lesson 9, now just to tag onto the previous lesson, you can spend 50 hours making something as detailed as possible, but unless you have the correct foundations, your drawings will always fall flat. No amount of details is going to correct your foundations, which means you'll just be fighting with it the entire time. It's not until you actually focus on the correct elements and the correct factors within the drawing process, like the foundations and values, that's when your drawing then just falls into place. Lesson 9, values over details. Details are the shiny object of the portrait. They are what distracts you from the most important information of a portrait. Details too early will kill your drawing. And lesson number 10. Now regardless of, let's say when I was only drawing with the grid method, or specifically where I am right now in my drawing journey, this lesson applies across the board. If I keep drawing in the exact same way, I'll be creating the exact same work over and over again, which is fine if I'm happy with it, but if I'm not, I'll then start experimenting. Whether that's with a slightly different material or a slightly different approach, the important thing is experimenting opens new creative doors for you. Lesson 10, experimenting is the key to growth. Whether or not the feedback you get from that experimental piece is something beautiful or something you don't like, it's still valuable insights, and you take that with you into your next drawing. If you only work on what you're good at, your work will improve. But if you work on what you're not good at, your work will transform. If I hadn't have experimented and gone outside of my comfort zone, all of these lessons that I've just talked through, I would know none of them. It is by far the most important lesson, which is why still today I experiment with my work all the time. Now, although all of these lessons are very powerful, if you don't know how to visually simplify a portrait into its most basic form, then none of them are really going to work. So watch this video so you can approach your drawings in the most viable and the most simplest way and create portraits accurately by freehand and put your own unique stamp on it.